Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Heritage Hour of Museum of Christian Art in Old Goa. I am Benjamin Monser, the Cultural Associate and Educator here at MoCA. So just to introduce you to the topic, Circulating Objects, Syncretic Works, the Cradle of the Infant Jesus in the MoCA collection. I'm pretty sure you all must have read it when the poster went out, but I'll just read out to you what we're going to see in today's session. From intricately carved cradles cherished in European convents to synthetic versions crafted in colonial Goa, miniature beds of the Christ child were intimate devotional objects that bridged continents and cultures. Emerging in the 14th century, especially among religious women, these cribs invited tender, emotional forms of prayer and reflection. The stock explores their spiritual and performative roles, tracing how European models circulated and transformed across regions. Through these delicate objects, we uncover stories of cross cultural devotion, artistic adaptation, and the ways faith was shaped through touch, tenderness, and material imagination. And to introduce you, our speaker, Jessica Butori holds a degree in art history from the University of Pisa, where she wrote her thesis on miniature cribs and cradles of the infant Jesus. She is currently pursuing postgraduate studies at the University of Florence. Her research focuses on iconological themes, the interactive and performative nature of devotional objects, and the 15th century Central Italian painting. Her upcoming publications include articles in Arte Cristiana and Ludica, reflecting her deep interest in the intersections of material culture, devotion, and visual storytelling. Once again, we welcome Jessica, and over to you, Jessica, for this wonderful session.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Do you see the slide?
Yeah, it's visible, yes.
Okay. So today I will start my talk by showing you some works that will help us understand and circumstantiate the cradle of the infant Jesus in the MoCA collection, which belongs to a wide devotional world concerning the infancy of Christ. Indeed, from the late Middle Ages, a lot of new objects and images started to be produced in order to respond to a desire, also oriented by the preaching of mendicant orders, toward practices of identification with and participation in the events narrated in the Gospels. Devotion towards the infancy of Jesus led to the production of many isolated plastic images of the Christ child, made in very different materials, from metal to ivory, wood, but also wax, and some of them were surely used during Christmas celebration, where the statuette was put standing on the altar or lay down in a manger to recreate the nativity scene. This will eventually lead to the birth of the modern creche. We can imagine how this kind of statuette could induce the enactment of maternal care behaviors, helping the devotees, above all religious women, to achieve mystical experiences of intimate encounters with the Christ child. These affectionate behaviors were in fact encouraged by written sources like the Meditationes Vitae Christi, written in Tuscany in the early 14th century by an anonymous Franciscan friar serving as spiritual advisor to a Poor Clare or Tuscan convent. Let me read a meaningful passage where it is clear how physical the meditation could get when supported by these kind of objects. It says, even the shepherds came to worship him. Kneel down also, then kiss the beautiful little feet of the infant Jesus who lies in the manger, and beg his mother to let you hold him a while. Pick him up and hold him in your arms. Gaze on his face with devotion and reverently kiss him and delight in him. Then return him to the mother and watch her attentively as she cares for him, assiduously and wisely, nursing him and rendering all services, and remain to help her if you can. These and other similar statuettes involved an interactive approach. Not only they were touched and moved, they were also often dressed and adorned with jewels. The diffusion from the late Middle Ages onward of this kind of works in monasteries, especially female ones, and private homes was extensive and continued uninterruptedly under the indulgent supervision of Counter-Reformation church authorities, animated by wise pragmatism on one hand, and despite the reproach of Lutherans and Calvinists on the other, just as their use persisted over the century. However, there was no shortage of voices of derision. Even at the end of the 18th century, the use of such tangible supports in women's devotion provoked the indignation of some, and I quote, "The nuns carried around a baby Jesus doll in a cart dragged by a red rope through all the corridors of the convent. Even at the age of 50, the nuns remained children, as happy to play with a sacred doll as a 13-year-old girl is play with a profane doll." Central European miniature cradles and crib certainly belongs to this devotional universe. They were widely popular in Flanders, in the southern Netherlands, and in the Rhineland of the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, and were among the first works to take on the new attention to the Christ infancy. They were produced in wood, in ivory, in silver, and they were mainly, but not exclusively, used by women within the walls of monasteries and beguinage. These artifacts seem, at least at the beginning of the history of the individual object, to have been the personal possession of women, especially religious but also lay women, and could then be left to the community of reference, eventually becoming the occasion for a choral devotion. Thanks to some testimonies collected at the end of the 19th century, when some of the cradles were still used, we know, for example, that during the Christmas period in the Abbey of San Godelieve in Bruges, nuns used to put their carved wooden cradles between two candlesticks on a small table in the shape of an altar, and I quote, "Every nun who enters the chapel kneels in front of the child Jesus and with a naive pity, after saying her prayers, cradles him for a few moments thanks to a silk cord attached to the little cradle." The Augustinian nuns of the St. Anne's Hospital, again in Bruges, used to expose their cradles in refectory from Christmas until purification, I quote again, "On Sundays and feast days, after the evening meal, the sister used to gather to sing canticles in honor of the divine infant, while the youngest of the novices gently cradled him in his gracious cradle." These and other types of devotionalia were given to young women entering the monastery. A valuable testimony is handed down from an inventory of the Carmelite nuns' monastery of Sion in Bruges, which states that they had a cradle in unpainted carved wood with angels on it, and with the fabrics of the cradle and the Jesus to be placed in the cradle. This was given by the widow Van Womini to the Van Riegers, her two nieces, who were religious here, Sister Anne and Sister Margaret. This was from the year 1511, testifying that way the passage from the private property to the collective one. Something like this cradle preserved, Something like this cradle preserved now in the Rijksmuseum should have looked like the gift given to the poor class in Amsterdam by their father confessor, Bartholomeus of Middelburg, for which he provided a symbolic explanation in his sermons written in 1565. The bed had to be seen as a symbol of the meek heart in which they should receive and care for Jesus. The two posts of the bed hung from stood for the Old and New Testament, the pillow for love and white bedclothes for innocence and purity. The base symbolized unshakable faith. Devotional cradles, however, soon spread among the laity, plausibly because they became part of a collective and public devotions, especially during the Christmas season, thanks to the testamentary bequests of nuns for the benefit of churches. For instance, the cradle now in Paris belonged to the silk merchant Gerard Coquart and his wife, Margaret Madeline van Cattenbroek, has attested by the coats of arms painted on the object's case. Maybe it was a wedding present, because it was not unusual to give a holy doll as a gift to young brides in the same way as we saw they were given to young women taking vows, who in a mystic marriage became brides of Christ. As you can see, this cradle maintains the bells. When rocked, the rhythmic sound would have accompanied the rocking and thus the spiritual and sensory meditation for the user. Sound in medieval theology was considered a gateway for divine truth. The Antwerp exemplar I'm showing you, where bells are hidden inside the cradle, invites the devotee to meditate, accompanied by sound, upon the theme of motherhood by weaving relationships between three women, Mary, Elizabeth, and Anne. The two figures that stand centrally at the head of the bed are Mary and Anne, who, with joined hands, prayed for the child. They are figures with whom to identify with and from whom to receive behavioral cues. The short sides are instead painted with the scenes of the Annunciation and Visitation. The presence of bells in cribs is significant as well. They were activated not by cradling the infant, but at the moment in which the statuette was placed there. A kind of sound canopy for the infant is thus created by an activating gesture. All this establishes a clear parallelism with the bells rung during the Eucharist, which signaled the transformation of the host into Christ. By recalling the ringing of the bells that accompanies the Eucharistic celebration and transubstantiation, which marks a moment of transformation and the real presence of God in the liturgical space, the bells in cribs announce the effective presence of the child in bed. Through a performative act, the bells announce a sort of coming on stage of Christ. In that way, the presence of Christ was solicited and made possible by the object itself. In cribs, sound arises at every interaction and specifically at the moment when the child is placed on it or lifted up from it. In the later case, bringing to mind the moment of the elevation of the host when bells rang. Angels are often found on the top of the cribs, and even when there are not, we can still imagine their presence from halls that remain on the top of the cradle's pinnacles. In the Metropolitan exemplar, they are playing music with soft instruments. If we recover the angel's primary role, namely that of herald, whose first duty is to bring news, we can think of their music as complementing the announcement of God present. In the Namur example, they continue to fulfill their task with cartouche. But they often give the announce simply by playing music. We can compare the angels sculpted and painted in the Metropolitan Museum crib with the ones that announce the birth of Christ to the shepherd in the famous book of prayers from the Lambourg brothers. When the statuette of Christ is placed in the bed, the mechanism by which the bells are activated is clearly understood by the goldsmith who produced the Spanish 17th century silver cradle from Siena. There are many bells, but the four larger ones are connected to levers, which, when lowered, even unintentionally, when placing the child in the cradle, activate the sound. I believe that this kind of objects, by reproposing in circular time the first coming of Christ at each Christmas and the continuous presence arising from the sound associated with the continuous coming of Christ in the Eucharist, could suggest to the faithful to interpret these repropositions as anticipation in linear and eschatological time of the second coming of Christ at the end of times. I think that these objects belong to the same spiritual imagery that produced pictures like this from a 15th century Dutch painter, in which baby Jesus in the arms of the Virgin, portrayed as the woman of the Apocalypse, is ringing some bells to the angels. Returning now to the Spanish cradle of Siena, it must be said that it stands out of the picture we drew so far because it was produced outside the Central European area where the diffusion of devotional cradles was concentrated. At the moment, it is not clear which trajectory the arrival of this type of object followed, but Spain was certainly fertile ground for the reception of a model strongly linked to the devotion to the child. In fact, the Spanish art of the 17th century meditated a lot on the infancy of Jesus, appealing, for example, to original iconographies such as the child sleeping on the cross. That spread to Portugal, and from here it eventually arrived in South America. These are images with a numen character, where the candor of childhood is juxtaposed with the drama of death and martyrdom. This wide theme concerning the sleep of the Christ child became very popular. A rich collection of little beds can now be seen, for example, in the Descalzas Reales monastery in Madrid, which was founded by John of Austria, daughter of Emperor Charles V and Isabella of Aviz, who married the heir to the Portuguese throne, where, in addition to many infants from the 16th and 17th century, a large number of wooden cradles can be found, as well as a wooden bed that can be traced back to Portugal. Again, concerning the circulation of objects, a significant testimony is that of Angelo Orsucci, who was an Italian Dominican, who, living for the missions and stopping in Spain, brought with him and distributed some statuettes produced by the Dominican nuns in Lucca, as he recounts in a letter dated 1st September 1600. The children were very appreciated to those whom I gave them, and because here in Spain these children had never been seen, they went around all the cities, all the houses, and all the monasteries of nuns because everyone wanted to see them. These words also make us reflect on the role of missionaries in the circulation of works and models. And thinking in particular of the Jesuits, we can wonder what part they played in the diffusion of objects such as the cradle of Siena via Portugal and as far as India, where they erected creche at the end of the 16th century. For example, we know that a Jesuit creche was erected in Goa in 1596, and we know also that next year several scenes from sacred history were included as well. All the more so if we think that in India, syncretic works such as the little bed preserved in Goa were created. Of course, it is not possible to trace a direct relation between the Siena cradle and the one in the MoCA collection, probably meant to be part of a drawry to bless the union with children. But there are similarities in material choices, which is silver and ivory, and in the metal structure that cannot be seen in any other work to my knowledge, such as the crossed canopy structure above the bed, which in the Indo-Portuguese case is topped by a crown with a cross that suggests the royal and divine nature of the child who is lying there. But in a so different context, it cannot be a surprise the fact that the ivory Jesus of Goa embraced suggestion from Indian culture. His gold ornaments are those of an Indian child, a necklace of blue and pink gemstones, a belt hung with jewels, bracelets, and anklets. The god Krishna as a child, similarly adorned and laying in his cradle, is an image popular in both Indian art and costume. Furthermore, the silver bed shows the often used Indo-Portuguese pearl motif, as also the star-shaped floral motif on its sides, suggestive of a white flower that grows wild in the hills of Goa. Another example of this cultural mix and syncretism is another Indo-Portuguese ivory Jesus from the 18th century, resting on a gilt bed with amulets of mixed Portuguese and Burmese character suspended beneath the tester, and now it is preserved in London. This object was donated to the Victoria and Albert Museum by an English woman at the beginning of the 12th century, Lady Dorothy Neville. The figure of the child was presumably carved in Goa early in the 18th century. The crown and the belt were added by a Burmese jeweler early in the following century. Some pendant charms are thought to be from Naples, Italy, and were also provided during the 19th century. Consistent and meaningful is the presence again of bells and angels. Lady Dorothy Nevill, in her book of reminiscences, informs us about the lively history of this work and how much it traveled, as well as some strange occurrences that happened to her and the reasons why she decided to donate it. Let me read you some meaningful parts. Though I'm not by any means particularly superstitious, some occurrences which once took place in my own house really did cause me alarm. A great friend of mine had presented me with a most lovely gift, a bambino, which is Italian for child, or holy child, carved out of ivory. It came, I believe, from Burma, and the face was that of Buddha. On its head was a crown of gold, and there were also rings upon its fingers. This bambino lay upon a beautiful miniature four-poster bed, and all around it hung Neapolitan and Burmese charms. The little figure, indeed, seemed as if it might be as sacred to a Buddhist as to a Christian. It had been brought by missionaries from Burma, where he had been worshipped as the infant Buddha, to Naples, and he had there become an object of veneration to Catholics. There was something very fascinating and striking about this bambino, which could not fail to rivet the attention, and, delighted to receive such a unique gift, I at once gave the glass case which contained it the place of honor in my drawing room. From the day the Buddha entered my house, everything went amiss. Its installation in the drawing room was soon followed by a perfect avalanche of catastrophes. Within a week, to begin with, a son of mine in the city wrote informing me that he had of late met with nothing but bad luck. Everything having gone wrong, several of his best clients had died, whilst others had left England. A day or two later, my daughter was walking in Berkeley Square with her dog, to which she was very devoted, when a collie deliberately stalked up, took it between his teeth, shook it like a rabbit, then leaving it on the ground dead. Disaster now followed disaster, my other sons writing to say that a strange vein of ill luck had suddenly begun to pursue them. Indeed, a black cloud seemed to have settled over the whole family. Then it was that someone suggested me that perhaps the Buddha was unlucky, his feelings being outraged at its frivolous surroundings, for Buddhas were not used to drawing rooms. I now seriously began to think that the Buddha would be better somewhere else than me. I did not wish to give the image away. In the first place, it might offend my friend who had presented it to me, and in the second, such action might entail the ruin of the innocent recipient, while to sell Buddha was out of the question. At last I hit upon a solution, which was to place it in the Victoria and Albert Museum at South Kensington. Another important thing to highlight is that, from the material point of view, in the Indo-Portuguese production, it is clear the preference accorded to the African elephant ivory, which can be explained by the fact that it was imported by Portuguese merchants in huge quantities from Mozambique to the west coast of India. And now I'll show you another work in the MoCA collection. Another case of a cross-cultural product is the iconography of the Mount of the Good Shepherd that can significantly be found in a lot of European collections. That is a composition which is unique to Goan ivories and shows a child in a woolen coat sitting on the peak of a rocky hill, usually surrounded by sheep. Below, there is always a representation of the fountain where animals drink, and at a lower level, a cave where the penitent Saint Magdalene lies, usually accompanied by a cross and a book. The representation of Jesus as a shepherd refers to the Gospel of John, in which Jesus names himself the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, that is, all the devotees. This composition, as we said, has no equivalent in European art, but for some features it has been related to European models that came to India through prints. The child appears to be a fusion of two different motifs, combining the pose of the peacefully sleeping Christ child, as can be seen in a print by Anton Vierix II, with the figure of a child shepherd from an engraving by Hendrik Goltzius. But the overall composition must have looked to some Hindu models like this one. Then a new syncretic composition must have gained a great appeal to Europeans, as it testified by the numerous examples that can now be found in European museums and in Italy as well. In conclusions, objects circulated and produced the migration of artistic forms, which then could be reprocessed with the contribution of indigenous craftsmen. So highly syncretic objects like the cradles from Goa or the Mount of the Good Shepherd were created as a result of what has been called a transcultural negotiation between Christian and Hindu actors. Some of these objects are now in European collections because they traveled in the same way their imported models once did, but now they took the opposite route. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We will now take questions. You can drop your questions in the chat box. In meantime, Jessica, actually, I have two questions for you. So the question is,
Yes,
as you mentioned in a session about the infant Jesus that you've seen in Goa and the tradition where it's part of
yes.
the wedding trousseau. So I wanted to ask you, are there any such traditions with the infant Jesus that you see in Europe?
Yes, there are a lot of traditions. One of these is putting the infant Jesus as a statuette in a cradle in the altar, and then people would sing canticles to him in Christmas period. This happened a lot in Middle Europe, but also here in Italy we have some testimonies, and also the reenactment of the nativity scenes with true people putting on clothes and reenacting the nativity scene.
That's
Yes,
nice to
that's
know.
a question.
We have a question here from one of our participants, Swena, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. One of the images had a skull underneath the cross over which baby Jesus was resting. What does that signify?
Yes, that was a symbol of death, of course, which comes with the iconography of the Saint Magdalene. When she's repenting in the desert, she has a skull, she has a book, and she has a cross. All these makes us identify the woman as the repentant Saint Magdalene. Yes.
We have got another question from a participant. Um, the question is, the participant wanted to know about, have you done any research with regards to the fabrics that you see in the infant Jesus collection, especially the one that you have in Goa?
Yes, I do not focus myself on the fabrics of the Goa one, but in my research, I focus on the fabrics of the Metropolitan Museum exemplar, which was silk with embroideries and enamels and pearls. So it was very rich, and he had this iconography of the of the trees of the ancient people from the tree genealogical tree of Jesus, and also had some references to the apocalypse imagery, which of course, it collides well with all the apocalyptic tone, I think, of this cradle, because he had also the four beasts of the apocalypse, and also the lamb, which was part so of the apocalypse imagery. Yes.
Um, Another question actually that I have for you is, um, so with regards to the images that you see in Goa, the iconography is again very similar to that of Balkrishna. And it's you
Yes.
always find that the infancies in Goa that similar. It's always sucking its finger because it represents the time. I mean, from what researchers have done previously, that represents the time that when Balkrishna was having the butter, the makkan. So now, with regards to the ones that you see in Europe, is there something well, like comment about the iconography of infancies that you see in Europe, in European collections?
No, that I think it's something peculiar to Goan ones, because Jesus, the infant Jesus in Europe has always the hands like this, ready to receive the people who is mm, taking it from the crib, or it is portrayed as the savior of the world. So it has the globe and the scepter. I don't know how to say that. Yes.
Receptor,
So
yeah.
it's uncommon. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Any more questions we have? If you want, you can switch on your mic and you can ask the question directly also. If we do not have any more questions, um, yeah. Jessica, thank you so much for providing your time and conducting such an
Thank
engaging session of, showing us actually all the pictures were so lovely to see all the examples in Europe and Naples and in London and the ones in Goa. Thank you so much, Jessica, and to all the participants that have joined online. Do keep in touch. You can follow us on Instagram, or if you want like to, get added to our events group, then you can contact us. You can follow us on Instagram to know more about our programs and do keep in touch. Thank you to all our participants. And once again, thank you so much, Jessica.
thank to you. Thank
Thank you.
you. Goodbye.